There are many useful algorithms that one typically will run on any data structure. The standard algorithms library includes a large number of these that we can use without rewriting them ourselves. Finding elements is often very useful. For example, if I insert the names of everyone who finished the race in the order that they arrived, I might want to see if a particular person finished the race, and what position they finished in. Let's say we have this vector, race results, that contains C++, Rust, Java, and JavaScript. If we wanted to find out which place Rust ended up, we might write a loop like the one below, where we loop over all elements in the race results vector and return the end index if we find an element that is equal to the runner we want to find the place of. However, this function only works on standard vector. If I had a standard array or standard map instead, then this function would not work. One way to fix this would be to use iterators, which we covered last video. As a quick recap, iterators are a unified interface that works on all standard template library containers. This means that if we use iterators to build this function, then we would be able to reuse the same function on all containers and not just standard vector. Thankfully, the standard library has a std_find function just for this purpose. Std_find takes in an iterator to the beginning and end of the container, and then the element you want to find, then returns an iterator to the element in the container, if found. Otherwise, it returns the iterator to the end of the container. We can rewrite our previous function and make it a lot cleaner by using std_find. Instead of iterating through all the elements in the race results vector, we simply call std_find raceResults.begin, raceResults.end, and then the runner we want to find. We use the std_distance function to find the index, or how far the iterator is from the beginning of the vector, and return that. Otherwise, we return -1. Because all standard template library containers have iterators, the first and last iterator of any container can be used with std_find. Also, notice that we check to see if the runner was in race results by comparing the iterator with the end iterator. If the item isn't in the container, then std_find returns the end iterator. This works in the same way as how std_map_find works. Just as a reminder to the previous video, we can get the number of elements between two iterators with the std_distance function. Another common operation that one may need to do with a container is sorting. For example, if you are recording the names of everyone who attended class in a std vector, and you wanted to print out their names in alphabetical order, then you would want to sort everyone's names first, and then you would want to loop to the std vector once it is in alphabetical order. For example, let's say we have 4 students. First Matt arrives, and then Will arrives, and then Jason arrives, and then finally Joe arrives. And this is all in the std vector. We want to print everyone's names, but in alphabetical order, meaning Jason, Joe, Matt, and then Will. The standard library gives us a really useful function, std_sort, that sorts a container for you using iterators to the container. Std_sort takes an iterator to the beginning and end of the container, and then sorts the container for you, no matter if it's a std vector, std array, or any other container which has iterators. Here's how we would use std_sort to solve the situation just now. We call std_sort on names by passing the begin and end iterator of names. And then we use a range-based for loop to loop over all the elements in names and print them out. Because we called std_sort on the names earlier, this is already in alphabetical order, and this will print Jason, Joe, Matt, and then Will. One more useful algorithm is std_min_element and std_max_element. As their name suggests, the function can be used to find the smallest or largest element in the collection. Again, in order to work with all the standard template library containers, this function takes in iterators and returns an iterator, similar to std_find. For example, let's say we wanted to find the largest or smallest number in the vector of ints. One way of doing this would be to do std_sort and then getting the first or last element in the vector. However, it's inefficient. We only want the smallest or largest. Using std_min_element and std_max_element, we could solve the situation I presented, like this. We first call std_min_element on the beginning and end iterator of the vector v. Likewise, we then call std_max_element on the begin and end iterator of v. Afterwards, we insert the min element and the max element to std_cout. As we talked about in last week's iterator video, to get the value of the entry which an iterator is pointing at, we can use the star operator or dereference operator to do so. And you can see that we do this in the last two lines of this function.